Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on the topic of leadership in times of great change and crisis. This is the third in a series of webinars delivered fortnightly by London Sport in partnership with the Office of the Mayor of London. Entitled Talking Covid-19 and Sport, the series aims to provide you, London's community sport organisations, with support, practical information and a platform to discussion on key topics affecting the sector as a result of the pandemic. The first webinar in the series tackled the funding and the finance landscape, and the second, how to adapt physical activity at home. Both sessions can be found on YouTube, and I will ask my colleague Paulina, who is co-hosting with me today, to copy the links if possible in the chat for you during the course of this call. We are similarly recording today's webinar, and it will be available shortly after with subtitles for full accessibility. I'm Hilary Lissenden. I head up the Mayor's community sport team. I'm fortunate to be joined today by a brilliant panel of experts, and we're most grateful to them for supporting this initiative. You will have seen their full biographies when signing up for the webinar. So for brevity, because we have a lot of you on the call and a packed agenda, may I introduce firstly Gillian Moore, Chair of the Board of London Sport, Michelle Moore, award-winning leadership consultant and public speaker, and Mehul Kapadia, Chief Operating Officer of Motorsport Network and Digital Media and Sales and Marketing Specialist. Welcome and thank you, all three of you. A little bit of housekeeping. The running order, as I said, is quite tight today. So as soon as I've finished speaking, I will hand to Michelle, who will give a 15-minute presentation on the topic. She will briefly hand over to Gillian, who will then hand to Mehul for additional insights. I'll then call a reasonably hard stop at 2:30 because we want to allow a full half hour for the panel to address any questions you may have. Because of the number of people on this call, may I please ask you to mute your microphones throughout, as this helps reduce background noise. But you are most welcome and indeed encouraged to ask your questions at any time during the webinar, including during Michelle's presentation. You can do so either in the public chat function or privately to myself and Paulina, and we will raise those questions with the panel during the Q&A. A few questions have been pre-submitted. Michelle, please can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Hilary, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you to the Mayor's Office and to London Sport for inviting me on today to talk about leadership in crisis. So a very warm welcome to everybody, and I will be talking to you as my team. Those of you that know me know that I am a former athlete, so I talk in sporting analogies. Today is timely as we have the announcement that certain sports are more accessible and available to sections of our communities. This isn't as straightforward as it can be for most of us, but today I'm going to talk about leadership, and I know that lots of you on this call already understand the needs of your communities and therefore understand leadership really well. So whether you're leaders in your organizations or at a community grassroots level, you have strengths in your leadership already because you understand your communities and you care deeply about sport and physical activity. And what I'm going to do today is zoom in on some key themes around conscious leadership in times of crisis. A heads up, there will be a little bit of interaction. I'll be asking a couple of questions for you to respond to in the chat box. We will be going through this at a pace because we've got lots to get through. It'll be kind of like an 800-meter pace, to kind of take us through. So our first slide, please, Hilary. This is very much a slide that, for me, captures what leadership is all about. When the slide comes up, you can see it. It is a shining light, and I am sending love and light to everybody on the call today. But this is what leadership is. Leadership is leaders shining their light and their teams shining their light too. There is no great secret to leadership. We are all leaders because leadership is actually a conscious choice when we care about something deeply enough. Whether you work in the community or in the sports industry, in education, or you're a sports coach, or you're at a grassroots level, the best leaders of ourselves, to be the best leaders, we have to be the best leaders of ourselves, and therefore others, we have to decide to be that. And so my first slide is really looking at the self-leadership in times of crisis. And as we move on to that slide, Hillary's going to take us to that slide. We have to think about the things that really determine what conscious leadership looks like during times of crisis. And we have to first start with ourselves. When you have to display high levels of consciousness during times of crisis, even when you don't fully understand what's happening, compassionate and conscious leadership is what is required, because it's a series of positive mindsets and a positive behaviors that gets us through. That's actually more than trumps experience in these times. So leaders have to be grounded in their own values. They have to be clear about what they are and stand for them, and then that enables them to lead from the front. Deliberate calm is very much needed in times of crisis. In routine emergencies, experience is what kind of counts the most. But when we are experiencing a crisis, it's the character of that leader that is of the utmost importance. So deliberate calm is the ability to detach from a fraught situation and then think really clearly about how you navigate it. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll find that you'll have some tips around that. So as well, it's really important to remember that in the community sports sector, in the physical activity sector, we're good at all of those things on that PowerPoint slide. But the one thing that we're not so good at is empathy. And I mean empathy for ourselves. We often forget ourselves within that. And in a landscape of crisis, we have to remember that we often go into that fight or flight mode. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to look after ourselves? There are threats to us personally that COVID-19 presents. COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting members of the minority ethnic communities. We have to think about what it means for us on a personal level and think about how we can lead from the front, being the authentic selves that we are, acknowledging our own vulnerabilities. So empathy and compassion is about putting yourself first. And it is a must, because without doing this, you can't properly be of service to your employees and the communities that you serve. And so, Sporthead have done some brilliant research that looks at what our sectors are saying, what their number one concern is. And it is about their constituents and their participants and their well-being affected hugely. And that's self. We're managing a global pandemic whilst trying to work at the same time. So it's important that conscious leaders stand in their truth, own that power, and because of that, they're then able to stand in somebody else's shoes and empathize with their truths. So the next slide kind of goes on to thinking about action. So leading change in times of crisis. So we are being asked to pause right now. We are on a lockdown, even though that's being partially lifted a little bit. And that is really significant in the sense that we have to be able to, oh, sorry, I just had something flick up on my screen. I can't get it off at the moment, but that's okay. I'm just going to roll with it. We have to be able to pause. And that is about making sure that we find a way to have a framework to make decisions. So the pause, assess and anticipate act cycle is a framework that the Royal Marines use. And it's about actually pausing, anticipating and then acting. Now pausing doesn't mean that you don't act. It means that waiting for a full set of facts to emerge before determining what to do is a very common mistake that leaders make during crisis times. You might say that we're experiencing and seeing some of that being played out in our government right now. But the pause is to understand what your objective is and the potential threats and what the key factors are for your organisation and for your team. So it's critically important that you pause, you assess the situation from the multiple vantage points, and then you anticipate what's going to happen next. And then in the action, once you decide on the action, then you must act with resolve. And you have to do that with visible decisiveness, because that's what builds an organization and your team's confidence in the work of the team, and also it motivates them to create solutions to coalesce around the actual issue. So you have to organize your team. You have to make sure as a leader in that space that you forget about some of the hierarchies, actually. You forget about some of the politics, and you get on with the main issue at hand. And you work with your team that you can rely on, and you don't try to be the expert in all of the things. So the different expertise that you have within the team is critical. So diversity trumps everything in this situation. When you have a diverse team, we know that you have a greater ability to solve problems more quickly. And if you don't have diversity, think about how you can extend your team to increase the diversity. So that's really important. In the sports industry, we know that you have to get out there and consult. You do that really well as well. But if you need help with it, it's about making sure that you are really intentional in your communication with your community groups, telling them what you can and can't do, and consulting at a really grassroots level. One of the things that I did before this call was talk to Badu Sports about the work that they're doing at a community level, responding to the needs, doing great work, Nana, at Badu Sports. So I know that one of the things that we have to also be mindful of in times of crisis is that we've never done these things before. So conscious leaders know that they've got to take risks. They know that they have to be innovative. And a lot of the organizations on this call today know their communities inside out. They understand them. They know how to communicate with them, and therefore they know how to respond to their needs. But failure to act is actually a more serious fault than making a mistake. So action is really critically important. And performing with purpose is all about your values. It's about doing the right thing for the right reason, reflective of the team and the organizational values. And that is really important to think really critically about, especially when you're working with vulnerable groups, because that might mean that you're actually doing something slightly different to the government advice. It might mean that you're actually being more preventative than what the government might be telling you to do. So the pause, assess, anticipate and act cycle is an ongoing cycle. It helps you as a conscious leader create this state of deliberate calm and avoids overreacting to any new information that comes up. And then on our next slide, this is the bit where I want to kind of get a little bit of interaction going, team. So we are having to talk about crisis communication, how we talk to our communities. So at the moment I'm thinking that there might be some wry smiles when we're talking about communication, because the communication that we're receiving every day on the news is often contradictory. But once you've paused and you've assessed and you've anticipated and you've acted on, it doesn't mean that people get it. It doesn't mean that your teams understand. And so that's why communication is key. So I want to ask you, what are the 2 or 3 words that come up for you when you think about communication in times of crisis? When you know it's going well, what are the words that come up for you? Can you type it in the chat box for me so I can see? I'm hoping that I can see. Or Hilary can let me know.
I can let you know when it comes through. Do you want me to start reading them out, Michelle?
Yeah, that would be great.
I've got a clarity, effective and purposeful.
Brilliant, great.
Timely.
Good, thank you, Kelly.
Sense of humour and camaraderie.
Good, brilliant.
Clarity,
these are great.
Reassurance, purpose. They're coming through now. I can't read them quickly enough.
There's so many. That's really good. Thank you, team. You're on it. You're on fire. Bravery, concise,
and honesty is coming through a lot.
There you go, transparency. So thank you very much, team. The #1 job for leaders in a crisis is transparency. Transparency trumps everything, team. It is one of the things that the stakes are really high. So when the stakes are high, you have to let people know what they need to know based on the facts that you've got. And that means that you have to communicate truthfully and transparently at all times. That's what creates the trust and the accountability. And it engenders that vibe that we're all in this together, because that's what's important. Leadership is about that umbrella that you carry around with you and you protect your teams. But when in a time of crisis, you have to take that umbrella down and you're with everybody else. You have to accept in these times, conscious leaders have to accept that they don't have all of the facts. but people are looking for stability. They're looking for that consistent communication, which is honest and open, that values their input as well. So as a conscious leader, you are listening to understand and to be able to understand what your communities need and what your teams need. So that consistent messaging needs to be compassionate in its tone, truthful in its information, and hopeful in its delivery, reminding them of the value and the power of community, the collectiveness of sport and physical activity. We're missing our social connection now, and so we need to ensure that our communications skills and the ways in which we communicate can address some of that. There undoubtedly will be difficult around furlough, around potential redundancy, around grief, and this needs to be done with truth and compassion and empathy. And a friend of mine who's a co-founder of London Thunder Basketball Club sadly passed away, Anne Pittman, and to honour her legacy I had to write a letter to the community letting them know about her sad passing, and at the same time capture the legacy and honour her in what she did for that community. And I needed to look after my own well-being after I'd done that, because I was sad. And there's other things that we need to do around communication that are very strategic, around having our internal and external plans, around ensuring that we know our communities and know how they communicate. We need to make sure we understand the demographics of our communities, whether or not how they learn, what their if the ethnic and cultural or disability, all of those things need to be taken into account. Our communication skills and channels need to be multi-dimensional. There are organisations on this call who do that really well. The Muslima Sports Association, the Change Foundation, they're all on this call. So you need to communicate differently, and you need to respond to the communication in a timely way. The FAIR Network did a great Zoom call with some of their network the other day, which I was a part of, for ethnic minority women working in football. Why was it good? Because it spoke to me and my minoritized perspectives around my experiences of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. And I know other organisations are doing the same, just like the call today, just like what Laureus do and all the rest of them. So if I just show the next slide, Hilary, the next slide actually kind of clearly clarifies what we were just talking about there. And so if we jump to the next slide, the following slide is all about resilience. Now, I want to talk about this, and you've got the pillars up there, but I'm only going to talk about one of them because you can read all the others. But resilience is noticing our thoughts and unhooking from those non-constructive ones and kind of rebalancing as quickly as possible. And it's kind of going into our training bag of resilience tools to help us run our race, so the lactic acid doesn't get us. You know, it's a kind of sporting analogy, sorry, can't help it. So the one bit of resilience that I want to talk about today is mastery. Now, mastery is about mastering a mindset for success as a leader, and it's about having that growth mindset. And I'm going to look at this slightly differently. I'm going to put a Michelle Mooreism to it. And I'm going to talk about mastery in the sense of self-awareness. The best leaders are the leaders that know themselves well. They understand their strengths. They understand that they are superpowers in times of crisis. They have a clear idea of their values and what they stand for. And in times of crisis, this is what you do. You follow your mastery and you focus on playing to your strengths, and you amp them up as much as possible. You understand the strengths of your team and you feed that as much as possible, because this is what helps you come from a space where you understand what's in your control and what you're able to adapt, whilst being realistic about what you can and can't do within that space. African-American political activist, warrior and role model of mine, Angela Davis, best sums it up. She says that leadership is actually a collective experience. We understand that as sports and physical activity people, that when done right, it shouldn't be individualistic, that organizations and teams have multiple leaders that become leaderful in times of crisis. And so finally, on the next slide, I want to end with this next slide, Hilary. The next slide. This slide is a quotation that's a bit strong and a bit provocative. Actually, that's a little bit like me, I think. The future will reward clarity, but punish certainty. So it makes sense that the future will punish the leader who believes something is certain when in actual fact it is out of their control. The point about clarity is critically important. How do you have clarity about the future that promises to be complex, that promises to be more crowded than ever? Well, the one thing you can have clarity about is your values. Getting clarity on what you and those you care about is critical, because it informs your tough decisions in challenging times. By identifying what you care about, you can easily navigate challenges and make choices that reflect those values. So in conclusion, times of crisis call for us to dig deep and draw upon our innate skills and characteristics of empathy and compassion. Trust yourselves, team, back yourselves, and compassionate conscious leadership is open to all of us when we care deeply about our world. And we've reached our finish line, bang on time. The next slide will show us. Jessica has helped us get to that finish line. And I thank you very much for listening. My contact details are on the next slide, but I just wanted to sum up by making sure that everybody understood that where I was coming from was about conscious and compassionate leadership. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Michelle. That's brilliant. Sorry, the slides were a bit laggy. It wasn't my fault. Can I just remind everybody, please do feel free to post your questions so that we can make the most of the insight of our experts here. Put them in the public chat or privately, and I will field them to the experts. Could I hand it over to Gillian for any additional insight following on from Michelle?
Yes, thank you. I would probably build on a couple of themes that Michelle drew out there, because I completely agree with everything that was covered. I think the main thing for me, and I've been asked to talk quite a bit recently about leadership in times of crisis, not just with sport, but also with my other hat on and my other day job across quite a few industries. And for me, I think the common thing is nobody knows the answer. There is no right way to do this. Nobody knows how to do it. There isn't a right way and a wrong way. It's something that everybody is learning as we go through this. So if you're in a position of leadership, you can't do it wrong. You've just got to do it in the best way that you possibly can, in a way that you believe in. And, part of that is the empathy side of things. There's a lot of talk at the moment about a technique called coaching as leadership, which is probably particularly resonant in this audience, where coaching is such a common and well-known thing to do, whereby you're actually there to help the people that you are leading actually be the best that they can be and cope with it in the best possible way. And then I think the other element, which was mentioned in some of the points in the chat when Michelle asked her question about what words would you use, which is listening. So people are incredibly resourceful. And at the moment, out there in the world, people all over the place are inventing ways to cope, ways to do things, ways to get through things that work for them in this situation. And as a leader, one of the best things you can do is listen to what the people are doing, and then actually adapt and adopt some of that as you move forwards as well. Because what people also want to feel at the moment is that they matter and that they have a role to play in driving things forward, and they're part of helping. There's a reason why when the government launched its volunteer scheme, something like 750,000 to 1 million people rushed out to sign up. People want to feel like they're doing something, like they're involved and that they're helping. So if you are open with the people that you're leading, the teams that you're leading, you're inclusive with them, you listen to them, and you empower them to come up with the ideas and actually drive things forward as well, then people will pull together more strongly and drive this forward. So there is this element of empathy, there's this element of listening, there's this element of being open and admitting that nobody knows the right way to do it. And I think from my personal experience with what I've had to do over the last few weeks, there is something, again, which Michelle touched upon, which is about forgiving yourself. So if nothing else, if just hearing somebody say there's no right or wrong way to do this, just do it the best you can, then that really matters. Because I know I've certainly not always done exactly the right things. I've looked at some of the things I've chosen to do over the last few weeks and thought, oh, maybe there's a different way to do that. But it is just about being able to learn and adapt and change things as you go forwards. But it is common everywhere. It is strange times, and the only thing we can do is have empathy and listen to each other, I think, as we move forwards.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Gillian. And finally, Mehul, do you have any insight to add? We move on to the questions.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and great insights from Michelle and Gillian in terms of, essentially the qualities of leadership. A couple of elements that I would like to add to that, right, one is I personally believe that as leaders, we have to be eternal optimists. We have to keep finding in every situation, whether it's a crisis or otherwise, what can be the potential way forward. And that's where our attention needs to go in terms of how do we make and build on top of this. So kind of one of the operating principles that I would like to share, and which is something that I've seen work well, is being about this dual mode manager. Can we as leaders have that dual pace at which we can operate? One is where we are managing the current challenge and all the things that Michelle spoke about, building that empathy, listening in more, building clarity of purpose. And at the same time, keep looking for opportunities that we can have as we go forward. A three-step process actually in that is really one of create a certain amount of defense right now. We're all in sports, right? So we'll relate to the terms defense and offense in a way. So what is the short-term defense? And I think a lot of us would have passed that stage right now in terms of what's the short-term defense we need to put in place. The second is then about midterm mitigation, right? Because the opportunities that have come up, the challenges that have come up, the people side of it especially, how are we building in that midterm mitigation of that? And the third then is the growth mindset, right? We are always in an ecosystem, right? Each of us in our communities, in what we do, are part of an ecosystem. So how much are we looking at the innovation that is happening around us? How are different communities, different businesses managing their current present and looking at what would happen next? And hence that third element of what is that offensive part, which in a more positive way is what is a long-term growth path that we can start looking at and start building on. So that's what I would really like to summarize with, that can we be dual mode managers right now, looking at the current challenges, but at the same time an eye on what can happen next.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. So I've had some questions. I had a few pre-submitted yesterday, but I'm going to kick off with the two that have just come in now. So the first one, actually, I think to Gillian, probably. Sorry, I've just got a bit of a scrolling up. As a sports sector, how much should we change our strategies and focuses to address the current crisis? And how much should we be sort of looking forward to return to normal sport? How much should we be focusing on that?
Gosh, I think it's inevitable that everyone needs to look at their strategies, and there will be some changes that need to be made. I think sports sector is very broad. There's lots of different sports out there and lots of different things that people do. If you look at some of the decisions that are going on about mass participation events where people will all coming together, it's going to be a long while before we're from there. So if you're in a sports sector role that's to do with that, there's probably some massive changes that have got to go on. Right down to the other end of the spectrum, where people, like, if you're playing tennis and there's two of you who are far apart, then you can probably expect that there'll be more of a return to that being available quite soon. But I think there's a lot of talk about new normal and new ways of behaviours. I actually think when we come out of this in a few months' time, it'll be somewhere in the middle. People will have adopted new habits, but some old habits will also come back. So I think it's a case of looking at your strategies and seeing how you can adapt them, but certainly not throwing them out and starting all over anew, because there'll be a lot of that comes back together. I think what is certain is that there is a big focus on people staying active and how good that is. And if nothing else out of all this, there's such a focus that has come to the fore on being active and how good that is for your mental health and how that's important to get through COVID, and Sport England and the government have been very supportive of that as well. So I think if you're in the sports sector, that's something else to factor into your strategies. There is actually a growth in awareness in a lot of areas of how important this is and how that could be factored into your strategy. I know there's also a lot of concerns about how some of the less privileged groups of society are being impacted by this as well, and sport has always been a key part for those groups. So I think there's a lot of dynamics that could lead you to change your strategy, but I certainly wouldn't wholesale throw it out and start all over again.
Thanks, Gillian. Another question that's come in, perhaps for you, Mehul, is around sharing a couple of specific examples around good practice in terms of communicating management decisions that may not tick all of the boxes and communicating leadership.
Yeah, thanks. And communication, as we heard from Michelle as well, is fundamental and critical in terms of leadership, right? I think to build on the transparency point that we spoke about, it's also about being real, right? I think there are times when leaders tend to want to soften the impact. They want to probably do the sandwich effect of, let's do a positive message and a negative message and then a positive message and take it together. But I think the clarity at this stage about being real and at the same time being optimistic about what you can do is important. As we looked at a couple of our own businesses, and it's interesting, I joined this role of mine in February. So mid of February is when I joined, and we pushed completely into this space. As you are able to build a very clear path, right? And clear path till where you can see it, right? And then communicate that, people come along with you, right? So in communication, keep both the paths thing. One is keep it real, keep talking about it. And the second, keep the reverse path of listening to everybody as open as possible so that you're able to modulate your strategy as you go along.
Thank you. That's great. Michelle, there's a question come in. Can you comment on the particular place of cooperation between different organisations in the current climate?
I think collaboration and cooperation is even more important during times of crisis. I think that this current climate, though, can make it more tricky. I think that finding organisations that have, changed their way of working in response to communities and finding what you might see as good practice might be good practice in one area, but actually might not suit another area. So it's actually really quite different from community to community, and organisations that are supporting community grassroots and sports physical activity organisations have to actually be aware of that. So I think for me, all of this comes down to sometimes the quality of the relationship, and it's about how you reach out authentically to organisations who are leaders in their spaces, who are understanding what's going on within their particular community, because they understand that community, but they might not understand your community, and the context is very different. So I think that the premise around how you collaborate and cooperate within times of challenge is about being as authentic and as real as possible, but reaching out and asking for support and using a lot of the resources that are out there. There are lots of these webinars and Zoom calls happening for members of our communities within this space. And so I think it's about making sure that you're talking to the likes of the GLA and others and about finding that. And there are, those places where there are directories of great work. I know Connect Sport do a lot of work around this as well. And so it's really about trying to kind of hone in on some of the existing practice that's out there. And I know it's difficult because there's kind of like you're kind of bombarded by information out there, but I think it's about trying to make sure that you speak to some of the key stakeholders and remember what cooperation is like in normal times. It's always about the quality of the relationship. It's always about being upfront about what your needs are and figuring out where there's a mutual exchange to be had.
Thanks. That's really interesting, because you kind of touched on another question that came in, and I wonder if Gillian or Mehul might have something to add, which is, where do leaders go, or who can they look to at the moment for support? Because I think that is quite a confusing landscape for a lot of people.
Wow, it's a big question. I think anybody that they feel comfortable talking to, really. If I look, for instance, just in London Sport, and thinking about Toby, the CEO, and myself, we've been talking a lot just because being able to talk about stuff helps. We're just having chats, not necessarily about specific stuff. So just anybody that you feel that you can trust to talk to about what's going on will give you support. Don't think there aren't other people out there who are feeling the same way as well. like I said, I'm not sure there's anybody out there. If people are out there saying that they absolutely have the answer, then I don't think that's quite true. But it is definitely, if you've got things that you want to talk through, then talk about it with people that you trust and think have got similar experiences going on. And certainly where I'm finding support is talking to peers and talking to my team. Back to my point I was making in my summary, you know, sharing views, showing that vulnerability, showing that empathy. Don't be afraid to do that, because quite often, even if it's somebody in your team, you know, they're able to help in just the same way. So I find openness about that is quite helpful as well.
And if I were to add to what Gillian said, you know, it's also the openness to diversity of opinion. And hence, while we look at people who are in similar situations or similar communities, industries, or what in similar ways or works of life, try and look at what you would have not otherwise done. This is actually the time of being anti-intuitive, right? In some sense. So, and that to me will actually help us open a few more thought processes, right? Not necessarily each will be the correct path, but it just helps us open up the thought process.
I think that's such a powerful point, Mehal. I think, and Gillian, your points were really point towards inclusive leadership and inclusive practice. Often those people in our organisations who might not be sat at the top of the organisation or middle management, but they hold so much power in the community that they are actually sometimes the ones that we go to for those leadership decisions and to consult with them. But actually it's about inclusive practice, it's about inclusive leadership, it's about looking at where the gaps are and thinking, well, can I talk to somebody that isn't the person that I would normally consult with? If everybody around me looks the same, there's going to be an issue with the solution that I'm going to try and come up with. So I think this really lends itself to thinking about inclusion in its broadest sense.
Which is great, because it also covers off another question which came in, which I thought was interesting when it came in, because it's about slightly turning it on its head. How can team members, employees, volunteers support leaders? So I think you've covered that one off really. An interesting one here about poor leadership, what you might perceive of as poor leadership or bad decision making in the current climate, where obviously the emphasis is on compassion and inclusivity. How do you change the way in which you challenge that? How would you go about doing so? I don't know if any of you want to put your hands up to that one. I guess you've all got comments to make on that.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think there's no such thing as a bad decision if you can explain why in a way that resonates with the people who need to hear the decision. So a key is, if you're going to make a decision, make sure that you can explain why. People they have the right to context for whatever's going on. And if you're in a team and you have a leader who is making decisions that you don't understand the context of, then I think the first challenge has got to be, in a polite, nice way, what's the context? Why are we doing that? And then even if you don't agree with it, if you can understand the context, it's much easier to go with it and follow that decision. Back to my point about people who are leading, I have no idea whether they're making the right decisions or not. I certainly don't, but at least I can understand why I've made that decision. If the person who's making that decision can't explain why, then that's a different conversation to go down.
I think there's something about people feeling as if they're a part of the decision-making process when you're able to bring people along with you. And even if that decision is not a popular decision, but they've been a part of the process along that journey, that is a different experience. So they can agree to disagree with you from a different standpoint. And I wholeheartedly agree with what Gillian's saying around that, the aspect of being able to describe context. And actually in a leadership position, you have to be unpopular at times. That's a part of the gig. You know, you're going to have to make the tough decisions, and explaining that in a way that your team understand that you're with them in this, and this isn't a popular decision, but it is a decision that has to be made within a crisis situation. Because the worst thing to happen is for no decision to be made. That's the worst thing. And even if it's the wrong decision, even if it's a mistake, you've made a decision that you can quickly rectify. And I think, you know, we need to remember that the particular context of which we're operating in.
And if I were to add to that, I think it's also important to be deliberately calm, right, at this stage. And hence also reflect on whether everything is a crisis or not, right? While the overall ecosystem is a crisis, not every decision is actually pegged to that. And hence the ability to prioritize, and then the ability to be able to sharp focus on what is most important right now and what is it that you're going to actually, you know, take people along on the journey is where the focus needs to be. Because otherwise we'll also, if we get into a panic mode on every decision at this stage, that also won't actually help.
Yes, and a point's just come into the chat around that. Staying silent is not great. Keeping people engaged is much better than leaving people in the dark. Gillian, a question that's just come into me privately, maybe you could kick off. What's the best way for those of us that are here to support leaders and their teams to do that? Is there a platform for this?
I think it's exactly the same things we've just been talking about. So it's empathy in the opposite direction. So understand where your leaders are coming from, be there as sounding boards, be there with ideas, be there to help move things forward, cut them a break in that if they don't know all the answers, at least if they're trying to drive things in the right, you know, and be supportive of that, and be understanding of the point we've just made about sometimes when you make decisions, they may not be popular, but they have to be done. And as long as, if you're as an individual, you can understand the rationale of that, be supportive of it, even if the decision is quite hard. So I think it's almost kind of the flip of the coin of everything we've just been saying. Be there, be part of it, be willing to be inclusive. Don't just kind of sit there and look to someone and expect them to have all the answers, and be in it together. And I think, you know, certainly if anybody came to my door to have a chat or to ask me how I am or to give me an idea of something that could be done, I love it. I welcome it because it's incredibly supportive, and, you know, it pulls people together in a team.
There's a question specifically about new leaders. Does anybody have any insight or advice for new leaders who have emerged either in response to the crisis or just happen to be at this time of crisis? So either in a new role or in fulfilling a role which someone else maybe is no longer able to fulfill for whatever reason. So that's an emphasis on the new leaders that are emerging.
I would say that, you know, in any kind of new role, it's about being completely aware of the stuff that you don't know and giving yourself a break. You don't know the stuff that you don't know at this stage. You're being, you know, potentially have conflicting priorities, and there is a danger for overwhelm to come upon you. And in that space, it is about concentrating on the next right thing from that space only, and one thing at a time. And I think that when you're a new leader in a time of crisis, you actually have a space where it's down to you. So there might not be a template from before, and you're the one that has to drive the innovation. But at the same time, you have to be able to consult with your team and understand what's going on at a community level and what's going on within your sector. But it's about giving yourself a break, that you are having to adapt and adjust to a new situation. And so I think that's a bit about really kind of being as kind to yourself as possible and getting as much support and help that you need externally as well as internally.
And I would just add to that, completely spot on, Michelle. I think I would just add to that, trust your abilities, right? There is a reason why you are doing what you are doing. Trust your abilities, and as long as you can keep listening in well, then you will be able to shape up what you are doing as your strategies going forward.
Great, thank you. A question's just come in. For those of us who lead small organisations, for example, limited companies with one director, do you have any ideas or advice around how to work out decisions when you're on your own? So this person is saying, we've done the research, spoken to our participants, but now making the decisions is tricky when we're not able to talk through things with somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, a technique that I've used in the past and I've used with other people is, and it's just one way of doing it, is out of the heat of the decision making, is to actually sit down and write down the principles of things that are important, and what the goals are and what the principles are. So, you know, goals can be to achieve something, principles can be to do that in a fair and equal manner, to do that in an open manner, whatever. And then when you have something that comes up and you're trying to make a decision, is to go through almost a mathematical exercise and try and score the options that you've got for that decision against those principles and see which is a better fit. It won't automatically give you a right answer, because at the end of the day, nobody can make that decision other than you yourself. But it can be a way of bringing a bit of objectivity into the way you're looking at things, rather than just chewing it over yourself. So yeah, the trick there is, out of making the decision-making cycles, to actually sit down for a few minutes and just write down those things that are important to you as an individual or you as your organisation or both, and then score the things you're looking at when they come up.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I just would want to add to that. There is something about your values here as an organisation and as an individual, really. It's about figuring out what you must do in that particular situation, what you could do, what you think you should do, and what you won't do. And when you start asking yourself those questions, your values can kind of come to the fore, and then it becomes a bit clearer about the way forward. And also, you know, ask for support. Like, literally, the world of social media at the moment, I am going to talk about social media because there are some brilliant things going on social media, with experts from well-being to sport to business who are giving away free content. You can get a free coaching call just like that. You can get support from well-known experts out there because they understand that they need to give at the moment. So actually seek support and look for the webinars that are out there, the Zoom calls that are out there, the organizations that are coalescing around some of the topics, and directly ask for help, and you will be surprised. You will really be surprised. And, you know, back yourself, like literally, you have to find that space within you. Although it's tricky, go to someone that you can see has that confidence about them and ask them for their support. And you have to find that space where you feel nervous, but you're just going to go for it. You're just going to do it anyway. And it's a kind of backing up on what Mahal was saying. It's about backing yourself and trusting in your own abilities.
And that's literally just come into the chat as a comment. Everybody needs to trust their own abilities. So that's great. I've got one final question here. Perhaps Mahal, you could look at this one first. Somebody's asked how you can deal with paralysis in decision making by their leader. So that paralysis may come around by analysis or uncertainty, but when your leaders don't really make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I read the comment, it's also paralysis by analysis, right? And kind of stuff. To share a personal example, last couple of months, in 2 months, we've had to build our plan 11 times, right? In terms of what's going to be the scenario on revenue and cost. And I think while I agree that there shouldn't be paralysis by analysis, at the same time, the variables are so high now that if you're able to figure out what are the top 3 important things for what you do, right? Whether it's a community thing that we do, whether it's a small business that you run, what are the clear 3 success factors for you? What are the outcomes that you feel are the most important? And then keeping aside everything else and just ensuring that what you are doing is for those 3 things, right? So that I feel has been one way to actually sharp focus. But yeah, this is really something to avoid right now in terms of just doing too much of analysis.
Great, thank you. One more comment. What if the directors of an organization have different values and priorities or different opinions on how to respond to the crisis? Michelle?
Conflict resolution is tricky in a crisis. It just is, you know, and it's what we talked about before. Not everybody is going to be happy, but we have to find a way to be agreeable when we're disagreeable. That's an Obama thing, actually. I always manage to get Michelle Obama in anything that I say. But the reality is, you know, not everybody is going to be able to agree, because we're coming from a place where we're clouded in our judgment because our well-being is being compromised so much. We just can't accept, we have to accept that our productivity levels, our clarity and our vision are affected by what's going on around us. And so I think context is really important, but it is difficult. There are no easy answers, and it's about finding that space where you can just hear each other. And if the directors of if that organisation have values and priorities that are different, they often had values and priorities that were different outside of this crisis anyway, and this is exacerbating it. And I think that there aren't easy solutions, but decisions have to be made. And I think that people have to find a way to agree to disagree. They have to find a way to, there are lots of different techniques out there to kind of move towards a place where you can actually, people are conceding and find a new way in the middle of that ground, where they might not all both be happy, but they're moving forward because they're able to take some action.
Brilliant, thank you. I was just going to ask, somebody's just said, would a mediator be helpful? That's just been posted in the chat. I don't think they mean for me on this call. Absolutely.
Sometimes I think what happens is people stand in their truths, and they may not be that particular truth. We can become so wedded to something, and a mediator, an external person, definitely can help in terms of what can move somebody forward, but it's about understanding the individual personality. Something I do with my clients is I do a Myers-Briggs 365 kind of complete personality testing to understand the different personalities within the team, and what somebody hears and what somebody else hears can be very different at different times during times of high level stress. And so sometimes it's external that a mediator can help. Sometimes it's not about that. It's about really understanding how that particular person operates in a particular space. So, I'm sure that Gillian and Mehul have experience of this, but yeah, I think using somebody outside can be beneficial, but I think it's all about context and the different personalities.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I mean, I'm not sure I go with the term mediator, but more facilitator. So where I've found successful in the past, there's an art to abstracting the challenge out to something that everybody can agree with. So what's the common goals that are less emotional and personal? So for example, if you've got someone coming from a finance point of view and someone coming from a people point of view, what is the thing that they've got in common as an organisation, abstracting out to that, and then working back down into what needs to happen. And that's where a facilitator can be very helpful, because they can help take the conversation down that direction and then bring it back, rather than somebody actually trying to address, as a mediator would do, a conflict directly between the two. Because, to be honest, if you get to the point where there is absolutely no common goal, then I think your organisation's got a different challenge. But usually you can find a space where ultimately everybody's trying to achieve something, and it's more how you do it that's the challenge, and you just work back from it.
Thank you. I just had one thing to add myself, actually, which was, sometimes it's been widely shared now, but sometimes there's something that resonates with you when you're struggling a little bit. And it was the message that we're not all trying to work from home. We're at home in a crisis trying to work. And I think being able to communicate that to the team, and that we wouldn't always be sort of judged against the same standards as we might if we weren't in this situation, was really useful. So I was wondering if you might be prepared to wrap this up, if there's no more specific questions from anybody on the call, with perhaps one thing from each panelist, either, like Michelle, it might be your 3 words as you asked everybody else to give it, or it might be one message that you found super helpful, or one particular thing that people might take away from this call and from your amazing advice about leadership in a crisis. Before we finish, is that okay?
Yes, I think, for me, what I talked about is it's all about compassion, it's all about empathy, and it's all about our clear-sightedness. And amongst all of that, as leaders, because we are all leaders in one way or another, we have to decide to be that, but also we've got to be as kind to ourselves as possible within these times. So honor yourself by looking after your well-being, and that enables you to be in a much grounded and in a more positive space to be able to make those tough decisions.
Have you got a last takeaway?
I would just say, as we said earlier, this is there for everybody, right? This challenge is across the board for everybody. So it is about how do we come together, ensure that our teams, our customers, our ecosystem is something that we are always cognizant of in every step and action that we take. And health comes first, right? And hence all the points that we mentioned about the mental well-being of the team, that's a key area to continue to have focus on.
Thank you. And Gillian?
Yeah, listen, learn, evolve, be honest, lean on the people you've got around you. I know some people maybe have less, but if there are there, lean on them, and be human. As I said before, nobody knows how to do this. Nobody knows the right answer. Empathy, listening, learning is the only way to move forwards.
That's brilliant. I think we're ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on the call, and to our experts for their insight. That was amazing. Hopefully we'll be doing a few more webinars in this series. We'll keep you updated. And take care and stay safe, everybody. Thank you very much.